Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the auditorium of the Rijksmuseum and to Monsieur Lou and Asian Art Collections, Life, Legacy and Ethics, organized by the Royal Asian Art Society in the Netherlands, or the KVVAK. My name is Paramita Pal, and I'm very happy to be the moderator of today's event. Please allow me to briefly introduce myself to you. I am chief editor of the newsletter at the International Institute for Asian Studies at Leiden University. Our institute provides fellowships, publishes book series, and organizes conferences around the world. And our journal is a free academic publication on all aspects of Asian studies. I have brought copies with me, which you will find on the table outside. Please feel free to pick up a copy, and if you've missed your free copy, please feel welcome to sign up on our website online. Let me start today's program by inviting Edwin Lim, chairman of the Royal Asian Art Society in the Netherlands, to provide us with his opening remarks. Edwin, you're welcome on stage.
Thank you, Paramita. And of course, on behalf of the Royal Asian Art Society in the Netherlands, I would like to welcome you all to this event. It's great to see that so many of you have come to this event. The members of our society, of course, but also friends and guests of other organizations, such as the Vereniging Rembrandt and the VNC. And I would already like to thank, on behalf of our society, the speakers of today, here on the front row, Geraldine, Edouard, Yun, Anna, and of course the moderator, Paramita, and my fellow board member, Marianne, for organizing this event. My name is Edwin Lim, and I'm the chairman of the Asian Art Society. And with so many new faces in the room, I would like to tell a bit more about our association. So the Asian Art Society in the Netherlands was founded over 100 years ago, in 1918, by private individuals who wanted to disclose high-quality Asian art to a wider audience, to create interest in it, and to stimulate academic research in that field. And soon, the early board members and founders started to collect Asian art for the association. They went on several journeys and went shopping. They also went, well, for shopping to Paris, also to Mr. Lou, and in fact, over 15 objects in our collection were acquired from or through Mr. Lou. And you can imagine that we, as current day board members, doing a lot of organizational work, we are of course very jealous of those early founders who went on buying sprees. Anyways, that being said, we are still nowadays expanding our collection. But obviously, the beautiful and rare objects that can be of real added value to our collection, they are very expensive. But we are very proud that we, as a privately funded organization, that we are able to continue acquiring these objects. And through that, and that's really a main object, enhance the appreciation for Asian arts and cultures here in the Netherlands. Last year, for example, we have purchased a beautiful Chinese Tang Dynasty steatite stone jar, as well as a beautiful embroidered Japanese screen. You can see the screen in the Asian Pavilion, and soon the jar will also be on display. I should also mention, with the acquisitions, that we have been donated and have inherited many objects as well from our generous members and from others. Currently, we have about 750 members, and we own almost 2,000 objects, and most of which are on loan with the Rijksmuseum here. A current topic we cannot escape from, and which makes collecting nowadays more complex, is of course the issue of the provenance. And whilst the Rijksmuseum, that of course looks after our collection, is bound by the national policy on restitution, our collection is a private collection and therefore is not subject to the national policy. Yet, we as board of the Asian Art Society, we do not shy away from this subject, and we have developed our own position and opinion. And we acknowledge that some of our objects may have a complex background, but together with the Rijksmuseum and other partners, we support research on provenance and transmitting the complete history of our collection. And to conclude on that note, we very much look forward to the lectures on Mr. C.T. Liu and having an open-minded discussion at the end of today. Thank you.
Thanks, Edwin. Can I also invite Menno Fitzky, Head of Asian Art at the Rijksmuseum, and ask you, Menno, for your welcoming remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Paramita. On behalf of the Rijksmuseum, I would like to thank the Society for organizing this day. As Edwin has mentioned, the Rijksmuseum manages the collection of the Society, the daily management, and part of that management, of course, is research into the collection and publishing the results of those research efforts. And as you will hear this afternoon, Anna will speak about our collection, but the important thing about today is that we have outside expertise, and this is a very important point because the Rijksmuseum doesn't have all the knowledge. We don't know everything. We need our partners in the Netherlands and outside the Netherlands, in Europe and Asia, to help us, and together we inform ourselves and do that research into the objects as best as we can. So I'm extremely pleased that we have that cooperation, that international cooperation today, and I'm much looking forward. So without further ado, I give the floor back to Paramita. Thank you.
Thank you, Menno. We have an exciting afternoon ahead of us. As you can see, or will have seen from the program consists of 3 parts. We will start with a keynote lecture by Géraldine Lenain, followed by 3 shorter presentations by Yun Xie, Anna Schlotzka, and Édouard de Saint-Ours. And then in part 3, there is time for a discussion and questions. So please hold on to your questions until the very end. Afterwards, we want you to continue the discussion and the conversation outside as part of a curated tea experience prepared by our friends from Cha and Art. So please do not leave straight away. Please continue the conversation outside afterwards. Now, I am delighted to invite Géraldine Lenain to deliver today's keynote presentation titled Monsieur Liu, The Life and Work of C.T. Liu. Géraldine Lenain is president of the Friends of Musée Guimet and a specialist in Asian art. She has worked extensively in the field in many different parts of the world and is the author of several books, including Monsieur Liu, Le roman d'un marchand d'art asiatique, or Monsieur Liu, a novel on an Asian art dealer, published in 2013. Welcome on stage, Géraldine.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank the Royal Asian Art Society, and especially Marianne Souloumiac, who has invited me to speak today about a man that has been haunting me for years and still is. Also, I would like to thank the Rijksmuseum for hosting us today. The Pagoda, Rue de Courcelles in Paris, listed historic monument in France, C.T. Liu. The archaic bronze of a buffalo from the Shang Dynasty, who entered the collection of the Shanghai Museum in 1951, listed National Treasure, C.T. Liu. Listed National Treasure in China, C.T. Liu. The large marble Amitabha that you currently see in the hall of the British Museum in London, entered their collection in the 1930s, the largest sculpture, monumental sculpture in the world, 5.8 meter high, C.T. Lu. One of the imperial Tang Dynasty limestone horse stele from the Tang Dynasty, second emperor of the Tang Dynasty, Taizong, currently in the collection of the University of Museum of Philadelphia in the United States, entered the collection there in 1918, C.T. Lu, listed national treasure in China. You all recognize the Shiva Nataraja from the Chola period, on loan since 1972 at the Rijksmuseum, one of the highlights of the collection of the Asian Art Pavilion. If you don't know it, you have to rush immediately after the lecture to see it. It's very impressive. C.T. Lu. So I can go on for hours or days listing all the major pieces that went through the hands of C.T. Lu and that you currently see in all the collections worldwide, from the MFA in Boston, the Chicago Art Institute, or the Free and Sackler in Washington, Nelson Atkins, British Museum, Cernucci Museum in Paris, Guimet. I can go on and on. If you don't know C.T. Lu, you have definitely encountered many pieces that come from him without knowing him. So as you understand, C.T. Lu is the most important dealer of the first part of the 20th century, if not the most important Asian art dealer ever in the world. He has introduced in the West what I call the real Chinese art. By real Chinese art, I mean the art made in China for the Chinese, and not the art made in China for export, for the West. So he has introduced the taste of Chinese art in the West. By real Chinese art, I mean archaic bronzes. So this is a late massive Shang Dynasty bronze that is exhibited here in his Paris gallery in the 20s. I also mean archaic jades. So this is one of the highlights of the collection of jades in the Guimet Museum, coming from Dr. Gisler. So C.T. Lu has formed the largest group and the first group of Chinese archaic jades in the early 20th century, with Mr. Gisler, who was a collector, who exhibited his collection for the first time in Paris at the Musée Cernucci in 1927, and Mr. Gisler has given his whole collection of archaic jades to Musée Guimet in 1932. It's a dragon-shaped pendant, and the Friends of Guimet, who I'm the chairman of, it's our logo. So it tells you how important this piece is. It has been our logo for more than 100 years. So it's a highlight of the collection of Guimet Museum. And C.T. Lu has been the first one to sell those kind of pieces in the West. Sculpture, monumental sculptures. So this is, we'll talk about it more in detail later, but this is the main floor of the pagoda that used to be his gallery in Paris. So there's Guanyin and frescoes. So the frescoes, we'll talk about them later also. Those frescoes were, for people in Paris, it was the first time that they were looking at mural paintings. So before C.T. Lu entered the market, the West, when I say West, I say Europeans and Americans, collectors, they were buying more export art. In Europe, the taste was built by the Goncourt brothers, so Famille Verte, Famille Rose. In Europe, there was a special taste for porcelains, and we didn't know about archaic bronzes or archaic jades at the time. So when C.T. Lu entered the market, he created his first gallery in 1908. He, of course, kept dealing with this kind of pieces because they were making a lot of money. But little by little, his goal was to introduce new pieces and to create a new taste for Westerners. So the pieces I just showed you before, archaic pieces or monumental sculptures, nobody knew about them. Nobody understood what they were. And they were not selling for a lot of money. To give you an example, this kind of pieces were selling at the time on the markets between 23,000 and 50,000 US dollar, while an archaic jade or an archaic bronze that you just saw were selling for 64 US dollar. So at the beginning, he lost money, but he was convinced that he should bring, educate, sell, donate this type of art that was unknown to the West, but was the core Chinese art. And rapidly, he made a lot of money on those pieces because it was a time when in the United States, new museums were building up and collectors were buying a lot of pieces. So rapidly, C.T. Lu was very bright. He understood that if the collectors were educated, they would buy. If they understand what it was, what they were buying, then they would buy. And this is what happened. So he kept selling every type of pieces, but he focused and really developed a market that didn't exist before. When in China, in the early 10s, people were starting to discover those pieces, he was already selling them and putting them in institutional collections or private collections, so he always had a step ahead of everybody. So in that way, he was a genius. So he's the most important Asian art dealer, but very mysteriously, surprisingly, nothing much was known about him. I mean, we knew he was a great dealer, like he had the best pieces through his hands, but nobody actually knew who he was, where he came from, what was his network, how did he operate, what were his motivations. So it was a big mystery. So this mystery had a reason. The silence of C.T. Lu had a reason. And this reason was the will of C.T. Lu himself to hide his life. He lied to everybody on everything for 50 years. To his loved ones, to his colleagues, to his collectors, to everybody. So why? did he lie, and what did he want to hide? And my project at the beginning, so that goes back to 20 years ago, was actually to do a catalogue raisonné of all the pieces that went through the hands of C.T. Lu, but an extraordinary coincidence that came to me made me change my plans. And I discovered something much more spectacular that I had as a scholar to share with people. So it was much more than objects. It was the man that was of interest for me. So I've been working on this man for more than 20 years now, and it all started in 2005 when I got a call. I was at the office, and I got a call from somebody who introduced himself as the great son of C.T. Lu in Paris. I was in Paris at that time. And who urged me to come to the pagoda and see something. So usually when I'm called in, it's to see a piece. I rushed to the pagoda, escorted to the first floor, that used to be the C.T. Lu library, and I didn't see any pieces, so I didn't understand at the time. But I only saw boxes, and very dusty and old boxes, cardboard boxes. And then the grandson said, "It's there, all is there, here it is." And I opened the boxes, and I found dozens and dozens and dozens of files like that, very old-fashioned, dusty files. And I started, and very rapidly I understood that I had 50 years of personal archives of C.T. Lu. C.T. Lu was a very private, discreet, secretive man, and beyond that, he lied to everybody. And the family was actually selling the pagoda at the time, so they were cleaning up the pagoda, and in the basement, they bumped into those boxes, and they called me in, and this is how my research all started. So I spent weeks and weeks and weeks and years reading all the correspondence, and then little by little, I had to tell the story because it links his private life, his professional life, and in terms of research, which I'm very fond of, it's about sharing, and you were talking about provenance, which I think is key. So if we go through all that research from C.T. Lu, then we can fill up many holes in different collections around the world. So this discovery from there started a long detective work worldwide. It brought me in the most renowned institutions in the world. It brought me into the most important private collections in the world, and it also, and most importantly, brought me in the heart of the C.T. Lu family, and especially his youngest daughter that you see in the picture. She's Janine. She was 92 when I started the project, and I immediately went to see her because she has worked and lived. She's the last witness who has worked with her father. So when I went to see her, I spent hours and days with her, interviewing her, and she immediately opened her doors and shared everything that she knew about her father. And like all kind of detective works, it brought me to unexpected path. And especially, you know, C.T. Lu, I told you, he was very secretive and lying to everybody. We'll understand why later. But when his daughters or his friends in the West asked him, do you still have a family in China? He would always say, no, they're all dead. I have nobody left in China. And actually, it took me 2 years to find his village where he was born and where he was raised, the first few years of his life. But I finally pinned down his village. So it's a small village in Zhejiang, 2 hours and a half away from Shanghai, 3 kilometers away from Huzhou. And I found the village. So I was thrilled. I didn't only find a village, I found the heirs of C.T. Lu family in China. And this was very helpful because I'm very cautious with what I've been told. I don't trust oral things. I want to have proofs. I need at least 2 proofs to be able to state something. So then I found this little village. For 2 years, I was turning around in Zhejiang to pin down. And the day I found it, so it was a teeny village. Still today, it's as teeny as it was 150 years ago. It has 200 inhabitants. The village is called the Lu village, the name of the family. And it was a village that was producing silk. And C.T. Lu, when he was lying to everybody and saying that he had nobody left in China, he actually, I found, bank wires all his life. Every year, he was wiring the equivalent of $2,000 to his village until he died. The last wire was in 1956. He died in 1957. So without telling anybody, he was still supporting his village. He never went back to see them, but he was sending them money. And the village survived on what C.T. Lu was providing them. So this is the first wire. It's a school. It's the school of the village. It's the first wire that C.T. Lu, when he kind of made it in the 1920s, he started wiring money. So they used it for building a school and building a well. So this is the tombs of the family, and this is a family portrait of the time. So this is the last visit of C.T. Lu. You can see that he already is very sophisticated. He has experienced the West, but he was on a business trip to Shanghai, and he pushed it to his village to see for the last time his family members. So the woman sitting in front was his aunt, who actually raised him, because he was an orphan. He lost his parents. He was not 10 years old. His mother's suicide. His father smoked too much opium. So he had a very tough early life. And so coming back to his village, so C.T. Lu actually left his village. He was a teenager. He left by this river to actually work for a very wealthy family, the Zhang Jinjiang family. So this family was very wealthy, politically very powerful, and C.T. Lu was hired as a cook. So he was a young teenager working for this family, and this family had a son, Zhang Jinjiang, who was, you cannot see in this picture, but he's crippled, he's handicapped, very powerful man, but he was a revolutionary. So his father wanted him to avoid problems in China, so he was sent as a Chinese diplomat in Paris in 1902. So when he arrived in Paris, he arrived with his staff, and he arrived with his young cook. He brought his young cook with him. So this is how C.T. Lu arrived in Paris in 1902 as a cook for Zhang Jinjiang. And Zhang Jinjiang had a lot of money, was very powerful, very creative, had a large network. Zhang Jinjiang was actually financing. He financed the 1911 Chinese Revolution, and he was the right hand of Sun Yat-sen. So he knew a lot of people, and C.T. Lu was living in this family and network. So he had already this network ready. So this is the last time he came to his village. This was the woman he was supposed to marry in China. You know, as a kid, when you are born, you are arranged marriage, but he actually never married this woman. You can see he's wearing a Western, very sophisticated shoes. He's already, you know, in another world. He will completely forget the family members. He will not marry this woman. So this is him with his friends in Hangzhou. So what did I find? I found actually a man whose life in itself is a novel. It's the story of a poor, uneducated orphan who embarks at 22 years old in the suitcase of his boss on a boat heading to France. And thanks to his intelligence, to his eye, to sometimes his trickery and lack of scruples, but with the guanxi of his master, he made it to the top and he surpassed all the other dealers that were already existed in the West. He had a life full of adventures. He risked his life many times. So I will give you two quick examples. The first one was, you know, the imperial stele that I showed you before. When he bought the stele and brought it to the United States, and still today, because of that, he's seen in China as the biggest traitor and the biggest criminal ever, because they're imperial stele, and it's more complicated than, he didn't loot the pieces, he bought the pieces, but he took it out. He was able to do all that because he was very close to the nationalists. So first part of 20th century, there was a law in 1913, 1914, forbidding pieces to get out of China. But he spent 50 years doing it. And it's thanks to the nationalists, who he was close with them, so he was able, authorized to bring the pieces out. So one day, every year, actually, he was going to China, to Beijing and Shanghai, to find the pieces. So he had agents in Beijing who were preparing for 1 year, put aside the most important pieces for him. And in Shanghai, it was the same thing for the south of China. And then in August, every year, he would take the train, the Trans-Siberian, to Beijing, and he was going to do his tour, pick up what he wanted, and then come back to France. And after the purchase of the stele, he got a telegram when he left Moscow saying that people were waiting for him in Beijing to kill him because of what he did. So he literally jumped out of the train and actually changed his plan and didn't arrive in Beijing, but Shanghai. So people wanted to kill him for what he was doing at the time. And then the second time he was really threatened, his life was threatened, was of course when the communists arrived in 1948, when Mao's troop arrived in Shanghai. So City Lu was in the south of France, but he had his whole team. He had his colleagues and everybody in Shanghai and Beijing. And they ended up really tragically. So one of his best friend and right hand, Mr. Wu, left everything he had and flew to Hong Kong. And he died without any money and without any friends. Mr. Ye, who was his specialist of bronze, actually was sent to Qinghai labor camps for 10 years, and he died there. And if we go through all his team, they all died. So one jumped out of a window, another one was found dead. He lost everybody. So he would never be able to return to China. He wanted to be buried in China, but he didn't have the opportunity. So I will go a little bit quicker because the time is short. He was a womanizer. This is Zhang Jinjiang, his boss, and his first wife, Yao Hui. And actually, C.T. Lu had 3 passions in life: art, horses, and women. And he was not afraid. He liked challenges. So one of his first women he had was actually the wife of his boss. So he was quite gutsy. And this is Elaine in the United States. So he had women in different places, but always Chinese women. We will see that he kept his Chinese identity, because he lived most of his life in the West, but he intrinsically was Chinese. So he was very secretive on everything he was doing. And I'm going to explain a little bit, those are postcards that he was sending Yao Hui. So this lady in Paris, every day he would meet her. So to be able to meet her without the husband knowing, he was very creative. He invented a system of sending a postcard, and everything, the rendezvous, all the information of the rendezvous is on the postcard. So if you see the stamp, you go up. So the postcard has a location in Paris. So if we go to the top, it's let's meet on the 13th of April, so the next day, every time, at Versailles in the Bassin de Neptune at 9:15. So you see the stamp? You will see the stamp is each time in another, it's a clock. He uses as a clock, okay? So the one below, it's let's meet in Paris at Versailles, but another location in Versailles, the 2nd of May at 6 o'clock. And every day. So here, let's meet on the 24th of April at the Bois de Boulogne at 6 o'clock, and every day. So there are 368 postcards. So he met her for 1 year, every day. All the postcards are in the collection of the Shanghai Museum. It was donated by the Zhang family, not C.T. Lu. And C.T. Lu is a very complex person. So as I already told you, he lied to everybody. So when he was asked, do you have children? He always said no. And he had 4 magnificent daughters. But they were not boys. So he didn't have children. So Janine is the one on the right, actually. And he loved a woman. He loved this woman named Olga. She had a hat store next to where he was working in Paris, Place de la Madeleine. He loved her. He was so fond of her. But he actually married the daughter of Olga. So why? Who was actually twice younger than him. It was a whole plan, actually. He loved her, but she already had money coming from another lover. So they created a plan for staying together and keeping the money. Olga told C.T. Lu, you know, I think we should stay together, but I will bring up my daughter, who I abandoned when she was born. She's in a religious school. She's 15 years old, so legally in France you can marry. And then we can stay together. We keep the money that I keep receiving. We stay together. I'm your mother-in-law, but actually we're together. And you will marry my daughter. So this is Marie-Rose, the daughter, who you can imagine had a very, very sad life because, and she didn't tell anybody. Janine, the daughter, which I worked a lot with, she only knew about the truth 6 years before dying, because she never got along with her mother. Her mother, Marie-Rose, actually never achieved to have a son. So then every time she tried, it was a girl, so she was losing her husband, actually. And Citilou, the more they had children, and the more he was distancing herself. So for her, it was very, very difficult. So I'm rushing. So Citilou was not afraid of challenging projects. So this is the pagoda that you can see in Paris still today, Rue de Courcelles, in a very classical Haussmannian quarter. And when he decided to create, when he started to be very successful in the 1920s, he wanted to create a gallery that had a Chinese identity. He could have created a hôtel particulier like Camondo did, but he wanted to show his Chinese identity. So he created a pagoda, a Chinese pagoda. If you see at the exterior, on the exterior, there's a lift, and if you see all the pictures of the time, all the heavy sculptures are on the top floor. And I didn't understand why, actually. And then when I bumped into this postcard, historical postcards, I understood, because he wanted a feng shui location. So for him, this place was great to build it. But there was this Louis-Philippe house there. So instead of destroying this Louis-Philippe house, he built it around and created 2 top floors. So he couldn't put his heavy sculptures on the first floor or second floor because it was wooden floor that wouldn't support heavy pieces. So he created strong with concrete floors on the top. This is why the heavy sculptures were shown. So at the time when he built that, the whole district did petitions and wanted him to destroy this because they thought it was horrible and it had nothing to do with the district, the very traditional district. And then life is very funny because in the 1970s there was a huge rumor in Paris that this building was going to be destroyed. So then the same people living in the neighborhood, they fought and they did petitions for this to be saved, preserved, and no more. So this is Citilou in front of his gallery at the time. This is, so I'm going very quick because I want to speak of other things. So this is, so all the pieces that you see, the frescoes and everything, they are now, you can see them in major museums. The fresco that you see here on the left is at the Nelsons, Alkins. The one that you see on the back are at Guimet, etc., etc. What Citilou wanted to do, and he's the first one to do that, he wanted the people, when they come in his gallery, to travel in China. So the decor, the mise en scène was very important. So he created the Chinese environment. So if this is, he digged in the basement and created caves to sell the sculptures. He was a real businessman, creative businessman. So to sell better the sculptures, he needed to create the cave environment so people would understand what they were buying. So this is a mix of Tianlongshan and Yungang and Longmen caves. You can see the Apsara ceiling and everything. And in the niche, it was the pieces that he was selling. And he was very innovative because the pedestal of the sculptures are turning. Because if you want to buy a sculpture, you have to see the back. The back is as important as the front. So he wanted the pedestal to go 360 so that the buyer would actually be able to look at every angle of the sculpture. And the lighting also was very important for him. So he was the first one, like the Indian gallery, to sell his Indian pieces. He actually dismantled an Indian temple and created it again in the pagoda so he could sell the Shivas and everything. This is the Cambodian. So I'm going very quickly of this gallery. This is the bird's room. But what I wanted also to add is he is way ahead of everybody. And this is a new discovery, so hasn't been told yet. So you are the first one to know about it. It's a coding book that C.T. Lu has created that needs to be researched because there are tons of information inside. So because telegrams at the time was ABC, but C.T. Lu had to communicate with his team in China in characters. They couldn't speak English, and he couldn't write with characters for the telegram. So he actually created a huge dictionary, and in order to be very quick, and he has handwritten all he wanted to say by topic. And in the telegram, he was just using ABC, and on the other side in China, they had a copy of this dictionary, and they would understand. So this brings me to the idea that it's another proof that C.T. Lu was double spy, because this is spy way of doing. And one of the last thing I'm going to say is C.T. Lu is a businessman, but he wanted to be seen as a scholar. So he was a Chinese, so he had to find ways for him to be respected in the West, because there was a lot of racism at the time, and no Westerner curators, directors of museums wanted to meet him because he was a Chinese, and Chinese were seen only on railways, workers. So how can this Chinese bring us important pieces? So he had to struggle, and one way of imposing himself in this scholar world was to act and to be and to show them that he's a scholar. So he was able to read the inscription, and every exhibition that he was doing in his gallery, he published catalogs, but really deep researched catalogs. And his gallery was like a salon where everybody was meeting in his gallery to discuss the latest discoveries. So every time you would go in his gallery, you would find the Metropolitan director or curator or Rockefeller. So this is what he really struggled to do, is to have many hats. So C.T. Lu was a chameleon. He was really changing his appearance and his discourse depending on the person he had in front of him. So when he was with Westerners, he would act like Westerner. He would dress like Westerner, like a gentleman. But when he was in China, he would actually, so here he's in the Western clothes, but he would, act like a Chinese. And his friends were Chinese, everything was Chinese. So his identity is Chinese. And the last word he said before dying to Janine, who was the last person he saw, he said to her, you made it like a man. Because she worked with him and she was very successful. So he actually kept his Chinese identity throughout his life. Thank you.
Thank you, Géraldine. We move on to part 2 of our presentations now, and start with Yunxie's talk, The Formation of Knowledge, C.T. Lu's Artifacts, and the Scholars Who Built a Knowledge Network Across Disciplines. Xie is a PhD candidate at Ghent University, specializing in the history of painting and colonial history in the Dutch East Indies. We look forward to your talk, Xie.
Okay, thank everyone. 1 week ago, actually, I was in Beijing. I was with my parents, and I told them, "Hey, Mom, do you want to see do some treasure hunt? So let's find out where City Lu's Beijing shop, where that is." So according to the record, City Lu's Beijing shop was located in number 16 Chongzhenguan. There's Chongzhenguan, and in the Xianyukou, near Qianmen area. That place is right in the heart of in Beijing. So we found Xianyukou, that place, and we found the Chongzhenguan, but they made some mistake. Should be another Chinese character on it. So we found this Chongzhenguan was an imperial temple. So we found these two places, but because this whole area was completely transformed, so the number 16 is gone forever. So I just stand in front of this ruin of the temple. So I wonder, it must be 100 years ago, City Lu might have walked down the same street and passed by the same temple and walked into his shop. And his place actually the shop Lu Wu shop, Lu Wu company is City Lu worked together with another art dealer named Wu Qizhou. But there is news. If you read Chinese, you will find very interesting or very shocked. So this news is talk about in 1929, Wu Qizhou was arrested. For what? For art trafficking. So, and he was arrested in the same location I was looking for, number 16 Chongzhenguan, that place. Wu Qizhou was arrested in his shop. And then, so we talk about this art trafficking, that's problem. There was another news around the same area when the last emperor in China, Qing dynasty, Pu Yi, he was trying to sell his art collection, but he was got harsh criticized because many foreign art dealers went for this art auction. So one thing we know is selling antiquities to foreigners, even 100 years ago in China, was not exactly considered as a right thing. So let's go back to this Wu's news. It's very interesting detail in this news. I put some translation here. So when Wu was arrested, they found the policeman found another man also in this shop, and before this policeman figure out who he is, what he's doing, what connection with this art trafficking, they arrest him first because they think art trafficking so serious. They arrest him first and figure out is he real criminal or not. And that moment, the privacy was not so big thing, so they put his name on the news, his home address on the news, before he figure out he's a real criminal or not. So we see the police take this case so seriously, this case. They found a random guy in this shop, just arrest him first. But one thing we're missing, where's Lu? Lu is our official business partner of Wu. But in this whole news, we cannot find anything about Lu. And now we try to figure out what. We don't know exactly the reason, but one thing we're sure, Lu had very powerful friends. Just like Zhang Jinjiang just said, Lu worked under Zhang Jinjiang for many years. And Lu had very good connection with the whole family, not only the man, also the wife. And so I will go very quick that part because we already learned the postcard thing. So in this postcard, Lu not only asks about the business needs, also about, oh, your family, I just visit somewhere, how about your children, something. And even sometimes only sign a name, Lu. And we all know sometimes it conveys very secret message in it. So now we see one side, Lu's partner got arrested in Beijing, but another side, Lu got a prize from the Chinese government, and Lu sold the antique in Paris, and he announced, I donated money to Chinese military, and Chinese ambassador in France to support him in person in this news. And there, we got that Chinese government announced an official commendation to him because Lu donated a giant Buddha to the Chinese government. Chinese government can use this as a gift to the UK. So the Chinese government consider is Lu helped with this national diplomacy. So give him a prize for. And so we know Lu is such kind of a player. He played in these political games. But his partner did not share any of them. Okay, and now we know Lu is not only playing in the political game, he also tried himself to make friends in the cultural world. And one of his friends, or his support is a Chinese writer, famous Chinese writer, name is Lin Yutang. At the moment, Lin Yutang has a great idea. He wants to invent a Chinese typewriter. But the project is too expensive. So Lin had a financial problem. And Lin borrowed money overall, but only Lu would like to lend him money. So later on, when Lin Yutang visited France, and Lu even invited Lin Yutang to his private villa. So there's not only a superficial connection. There's two family also made friends. And now we know the City Lu has a very good social network, a political network. But don't forget, he's an art dealer. The core of his business is sell art. But what makes City Lu so special? Now, I would ask you a question. When you go inside a museum, when you try to look at an artwork, you will always see artwork here, a little label here. Which message you see first? You see the art first, or you see the words first, the text first? For our experience, if some artwork we know well, suppose like a Rembrandt, Baroque, some Greek antiques, or some Impressionism, we know a lot. So sometimes we look at art first. The text, sometimes we skip it. But if you run into Asian art, you've never heard before, what you will do? You will put more energy, more time on the text on it, right? So sometimes the text play more important role to us. So let's see. Actually, learn art from the text is not a new method. This method ran in this European traditional education for years long. So when I just studied art history at University of Amsterdam, my professor told me the first things you should know who is the founding father of art history. It's this man, Johann Winkelmann. He was the founding father of art history. So I figured out, if he is a founding father, means before him, there's no other art history trained, at least in the university, but means he was not born as art historian. He was even not trained as art historian. So before he was called art historian, he must have another identity, what he was. I figured out, actually, he was trained in the German gymnasium education system. Before he was art historian, he was a philologist. He learned the ancient language and text at school. So this kind of classical training made him made him to think about what is the best art for him. Winkelmann told us the best art he thinks is ancient Greek art. So, and now he even established a way how to understand art is we learn the inscription on the art, and we reference the relative classical books and put them together to figure out what art is. This is a methodology, or we appreciate art. Okay, for the classical art, for the European art, we do this way. But now, in 19th century, the Asian art, the interest in Asian art come. Should we also use the same way to appreciate? People find out, oh, these two kind of arts are totally different. Before, the kind of mindset we use on the European art, we cannot use on the Asian art. But the mindset are different, but method could be the same. So, and then we found the person. That person is Paul Pelliot. He worked together with C.T. Lu. One of the catalog, there's two, catalog he composed together with C.T. Lu. So, Paul Pelliot, he was never trained as an art historian. He appreciated Chinese art, the Asian art, not think from the art way to do it. What he do it is, we find here, in his catalog, he tried to look for into the inscription on this jade, and try to also piece also some ancient books, Chinese books, to find out what this means. Actually, he used books and inscriptions and tried to figure out what this artwork means. This is not kind of a new way, but people use in the classical art. They use that way to try to figure out this ancient art. And also interesting, in the 19th century, when Dutch people, they tried to search the art, the ancient art in Java, they did not go for the most beautiful art, but they go for the objects with the inscription on it. The Dutch government, they even hire a linguistic to figure out what that means. So for them, the object with inscription are more important than the pretty things. So now we see this method from text and inscription also used by now. Most of us, we know Wilhelmine van Noort, our art historian and curator China at World Museum. In her dissertation from 2024, I found out she researched an ancient Chinese mirror. And the method she used is she go for to figure out what's the meaning of the text. And then he tried to put the text to compare with some old books, Chinese books, and try to figure out what this means. So the same method, sure, Wilhelmine van Noort, she used other method, but one of the method exactly created by C.T. Lu and Pelliot. So we see the C.T. Lu's legacy until now. So, and this is not only scholar C.T. Lu work together. There's not a whole list. It's a part of them. We see the background of them. Many of the scholars work with C.T. Lu. They are philologists classical language, hymnasm. So we found is C.C. Lu, perhaps he never announced that, perhaps he never really figured out what he's doing, but actually what he's doing is he tried to make a bridge between the Asian art and with this European classical training. He used the people who trained use this classical way, methodology, try to analyze the Asian art. With this way, he make a bridge. Then this two-man set can meet together, and European and American clients to understand the art itself. Okay, this is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Yunxie. Next, we welcome Anna Schlotzka, who will speak on C.T. Lu and South Asian art objects in the collection of the Royal Asian Art Society in the Netherlands. Anna Schlotzka is curator of South Asian art at the Rijksmuseum and researches Hindu ritual and art and ritual and iconographic Sanskrit texts. She is currently involved in a project on the production and casting technology of Chola bronzes. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you, Paramita, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak here today at this fascinating event. Right. As we know, and as we realize today again, C.T. Lu was a great expert in the field of Chinese art, and it's not surprising, it's where he was born and where his all contacts, or most of his contacts, were his interests, including women, more or less, as we learned today. But what about his relationship with South Asia? Not much has been written about that, and if it was mentioned somewhere in some publications, it usually concerns specific cases, but we still miss an overview, which is something that maybe for the future. Today, I would like to reflect briefly on C.T. Lu's connection with South Asia, specifically India, on the basis of a few objects which are in the collection of the Royal Society of Friends of Asian Art in the Netherlands, and so they are in the Rijksmuseum now. There are currently 5 such objects in the Society collection that were either sold directly by C.T. Lu to the Society, or they can be somehow linked to him. I'm very happy for this opportunity to speak about, to introduce to you these objects, even if in a rapid speed, as you are going to see, because some of them are very well known, while others are not well known, not even in Amsterdam. Connecting some of these objects with C.T. Lu was not always very straightforward and required some research in archives and old publications. And it's not impossible, because this research on provenance at the Rijksmuseum is ongoing, that we will discover more such objects with links to C.T. Lu in the future, both in the Society's collection and in the collection of the Rijksmuseum itself. So what are these 5 objects? You see them here on the slide, and what immediately becomes apparent is how diverse they are. On the one hand, they fit very well into the profile of Indian art objects sold by C.T. Lu in his galleries. More about it later. So they, on the one hand, they fit in a pattern, but on the other hand, they are very diverse, and hence my title, Masterpieces and Surprises, with masterpieces on the left, surprises on the right, and everything else in between. So I'm going to go very quickly through these 5 objects, and I will pay a bit more attention to the last one, to the dancing Shiva, the true masterpiece. Right, so first object that's connected to C.T. Lu that I would like to introduce to you today is this statue of a goddess. It was made in Tamil Nadu, Southeast India. It's a bronze made in the Vijayanagara period, so early 15th century, I think. And it's interesting in 2 ways. First of all, it was not bought from C.T. Lu, but it was a gift. The statue was gifted to the Society by C.T. Lu himself in 1938. Citilou often gifted objects to potential buyers or to frequent buyers. And because he was a great businessman, of course, it was in hope of having more purchases from the people. And again, because he was a great businessman, he usually gifted the unsold pieces. And yeah, and that's this figure of a goddess indeed remained unsold through, I think, 2 exhibitions, which is quite interesting, again, if we look at it today, because although it's a later period piece, Vijayanagara, not Chola, Chola was much more praised, until today, actually, it is still a rather good piece and of a good size, and I don't think it would be very difficult to sell it today at Christie's or Sotheby's, but still it remains unsold, which tells us something about choices and preferences in those days. The second object is, again, a bronze, again from Tamil Nadu, but it's an earlier statue from about 11th century, so it is Chola period statue. What we see here is Shiva with the moon in his hair, or with the moon in his crest, as he's told. It's a specific form of Shiva, specific to Tamil Nadu. Chandrasekhara is the Sanskrit name of it. And, well, at the first glance, it's maybe not a masterpiece, but it's a rather important statue because it has a number of interesting, unusual features, both in its iconography and in the way how it's made, which we actually came across only during technical research on this statue. We did technological research on some of our objects from the Society collection and the Rijksmuseum over the last few years. But you can read all about it in publications. They are also in English. That's a topic for another symposium. Anyhow, this statue was also in the collection of Citilou, and we know that because it featured in an exhibition. You see the cover of the catalogue of the exhibition here on the left. This exhibition was only of objects from India from the collection of Citilou, and it took place in Amsterdam, not in Paris, in the gallery of Karel van Lier, who was a well-known figure in the Dutch art gallery scene. So it took place in Rocking, not far away from here, in Amsterdam, and it was meant to boost dwindling sales. It was a time of the Great Depression, that also has to be said. And on the right side, you see the statue of the Chandrasekhara from the time of the exhibition, 1938. It comes from a Van Lier family collection. And as you see, the statue is still before cleaning. So it really looks different now, and it's also important for later. Anyhow, a lot of objects were sold during this exhibition also to some members of the society, and this statue was sold to Mr. Hulsman, a member of the society who gifted it first on loan to the society immediately after the purchase, and then in 1976 this loan was turned into a gift. So it's now in the collection. This exhibition was widely published about in Dutch newspapers, as you can see here. Well, the third object of the 5 I'm going to talk about today is not a bronze, and it's not from Tamil Nadu. As you see, it's a stone sculpture, and it comes from the state in India, what is now a state in India, just to the north of Tamil Nadu, from Andhra Pradesh. And Andhra Pradesh is famous for its early Buddhist remains, mainly grouped around the famous stupas of Amaravati, Nagarjunakonda, but there are also several lesser sites, also quite important. And this piece comes from that area, actually from the area of Nagarjunakonda, as I could find out some years ago, not from Amaravati proper, as we thought originally. In any case, this piece entered the collection of the society much later than the previous 2 pieces, already after the war in 1955. And it was bought by the society from Paris Art Gallery. What was the name? Let me check just to be absolutely sure. Moreau Gobard. Right, 1955. But we know that this piece belonged in the 1930s to Citilou. And we know it from this photograph that you see on the left. It comes from an article published in 1934 in Revue des Arts Asiatiques. The article that goes about, speaks about something totally different, about lintels in Pallava and pre-Angkorian art, but this piece is also illustrated there somehow. And yeah, so we know that this piece was in the collection of Cîteaux. Interestingly, what was bought by the society in 1955 was only not everything that you see on this slide. Let me explain. So the society bought only this right side of this pillar fragment. It seems that the original pillar fragment became even more fragmentarily, because it was at one point in time split in two vertically, and Cîteaux owned both sides. We don't know if the pillar was already found damaged like that in Andhra Pradesh, or if the splitting of the pillar happened in Cîteaux's gallery. It sounds a bit horrifying nowadays, but these things did happen. And the idea was, of course, to sell it to more than one buyer. So we actually don't know, but the two pieces fit perfectly together. I made a 3D animation of them, and they fit perfectly together. So maybe it did happen in Cîteaux's gallery. The left side of the pillar was not bought by the society, but the society happened to know about it soon after the purchase of the right, what is here, right side, and they actually wanted to trace it with success. Moreau Gobard could locate the left side of the pillar in a private American gallery, and it was offered on purchase to the society, but unfortunately it was never finalized, probably because of financial reasons. And after long and complicated way, the second half of the pillar ended up, it was in Denver Art Museum, for instance, etc. But it ended up in Tokyo National Museum when a few years ago, at least, it was on display even. So, yeah, it would be my dream to reunite these two together one day, but let's see if it will ever be possible. Right, number four. Number four is, is what I call a surprise. What we see here is a wooden statue made definitely in Tamil Nadu, probably by end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. And it's actually a quite interesting statue because it depicts one of the most well-known, important followers, mythological followers of the god Shiva, who is mentioned already in very early Sanskrit texts, so from 6th century onwards. They said, bring in. Now, what you should know about bringing is that he, according to a very well-known myth, he received third leg from Shiva, but here he only has 2 legs. However, if you look at this old photograph, you see that originally the statue did have 3 legs. Yeah, so what happened? This photograph is in the Rijksmuseum archives. I came across it, and it probably comes from Cîteaux, although we don't know it for sure, and it's undated. But as we see, Bringin did have 3 legs indeed, as he should have. And I wondered what happened to the 3rd leg and when did it happen. And then I came across this old paper catalogue fiche in the Rijksmuseum, where it's written, it's a handwritten note here, that the leg was removed by F. Caro, which of course is nobody others but Frank Caro, assistant of Cîteaux. So it probably happened sometime in 1930s still. Quite interesting. This statue entered the society collection in 1969, I believe, quite late, and it was donated by a member of the society, mevrouw and Mrs. Odino Dagevos, but we don't know where she had it from, if she bought directly because she was quite old already. Maybe she bought it directly from Cîteaux or not. But in any case, it's interesting to realize that this piece was also in Cîteaux's collection, and I would love to know more about that. I am fascinated by it because depictions of bring-ins, beautiful, ugly, you can think whatever you want about it, are very rare. Now, finally, the last 5 minutes will be dedicated to the true masterpiece, sourced out and sold by Citilu. This monumental Nataraja, dancing Shiva, of over 1.5 meters in height, was bought by the society in 1935, already directly from Citilu. Actually, it was one of the founders of the society, Hermann Fischer, who spotted this Nataraja at Citilu's gallery, apparently, so tells the legend, behind a half-closed door, together with many other South Indian bronzes. Fischer was that time on a honeymoon with his wife in Paris, but honeymoon or not, a visit to Citilu's gallery was a necessary point of the program. Fischer was immediately enchanted by this Nataraja. He wrote, he attended the board of the society, he wrote a letter that we have in the archive about it, and he really urged the society to buy it, which eventually happened in September the same year, 1935. It was not easy because the price was rather high, although understandable for a piece of this quality and size. The original price was 18,000 Dutch guilders, which was in that time 180,000 francs, which wasn't nothing. But luckily, thanks to the help of Vereniging Rembrandt, the Rembrandt Association, whose members are here with us today, and thanks to Citilu himself, who lowered the price by 2,000 guilders, the purchase could be finalized. Now, we know that this piece comes from Citilu, obviously. It was bought directly from him. But the society wanted to know more. They actually asked Citilu, where in India does this Nataraja come from? Which was a rather unusual thing to ask those days. But we know for sure that they did, because there are letters there's a correspondence between Citilu and the society members, which are in the archives of the society, which is preserved in the Rijksmuseum and is accessible for scholars and other interested parties. So there is, for instance, this letter from Citilu to Westerdorp, president of the society at that time, I think, in which Citilu attempts to reply to this question. He writes in the second paragraph, as you can see, perhaps, that he does not know exactly from which temple, that's what he says himself, the Nataraja comes from in India, but he will ask in India, and as soon as he will get the reply, he is going to forward it to the society. Well, this reply never reached the society, if it ever came, for whatever reason. Well, we are sure that, as I said, that this Nataraja comes from Citilu, but what was before? And it is something that would be very interesting to know also about other objects that came from Citilu, of course. So what the society had no way to know in the 1930s is that the chief supplier of Indian art objects for Citilu was Gabriel Jouveau-Dobreuil. The cooperation between these two was already mentioned in some publications, notably in a book by Padma Kaimal, Travels with the Yoginis, that was published in 2012. So nowadays, we can suppose that for 99%, even from this information only, that also this Nataraja came to Citilu from Jouveau-Dobreuil. And we have actually even more evidence, namely all objects that came from Jouveau-Dobreuil to Citilu were provided with a number, a J, letter J, and a number after. And already two of the objects that I discussed today, two other objects that I discussed today, we know for sure that they came from Jouveau-Dobreuil. On the right, you see the bringin, and you see the number written on the back of the base. On the left, the Shiva with the moon in his crest. On the back of the halo is the number. Bringin still has the number. The Shiva does not have it anymore. It was probably removed during cleaning long time ago, and I only figured it out when I found this old photograph that also these objects definitely comes from Jouveau-Dobreuil. when I knew that, I looked for an object, for a number on the Nataraja, on the dancing Shiva itself, but he does not have any. It's possible that it was also removed in the past because the statue was renovated and cleaned, I think more than once. Anyhow, we have something else. There is an invoice in the Society archive that you see on the left from the original purchase, 1935, where the number is mentioned. And you can see here in the red square, it's J243. And on the right side, this is a fragment of a letter of Jan Fontaine, who was Society's curator. After that, he moved to United States and became curator and at the end director of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And he writes here in the letter to my predecessor at the museum, Pauline Lusing-Schrölier, that each object that came from from Chevaux-de-Braille to City-Lou, including the Society's Nataraja, must have this kind of number. Yes. All right. Now we would like to go even a step further. Where did Chevaux-de-Braille got this Nataraja from and all the other objects? One way to check it would be to access the archives of Gabriel Chevaux-de-Braille, the Musée Guimet, and the archive of City-Lou himself in the Paris Pagoda that we saw already on the slides here. For many years, these archives were inaccessible to the public. Recently, the Guimet archive opened for scholars, and information found there did indeed provide some information about the Amsterdam dancing Shiva, at least some clues. The finds are published in a book, Oog in Oog met de Goden, in Dutch, unfortunately, written by Alexander Reeuwijk, who is here with us today somewhere. Yes. Yes, and Alexander was able to retrieve the correspondence between City-Lou and Gabriel Chevaux-de-Braille about a find of a large, over 1.5 meter tall Nataraja. And this Nataraja was allegedly found by farmers in about 1923 in the fields. And after the discovery, the statue was bought actually by the head priest of a temple in Mailam. It's a Murugan temple dedicated to South Indian god Murugan. And it's near Pondicherry. You see where the red pin is, and that's the temple itself on the left. While it was in the temple, so 1923, 24, 25, it was spotted by a student of Gabriel Chevaux-de-Braille, a boy, Tamil boy from Pondicherry, who told about it to Chevaux-de-Braille, and a few years later, the statue was bought from the head priest by Chevaux-de-Braille. And then it ended by City-Lou, and the rest we know. Or we don't. Because still there are several gaps in this story. We do not know where exactly the statue was found, the exact finding spot, which would be nice to know. Which temple was it made for originally? I mean, as art historian, I would be very interested to know. The Mailam temple is a few hundred years later than the Nataraja, so it couldn't be made for that temple. So which temple? There's no Chola temple around, at least. Maybe there was, but we don't know. Then how long was it kept in the Mailam temple after it was found in the ground and bought by the head priest? My assumption is that the Nataraja was not under worship in Mailam because when it was bought in 1935, it was still full of earth particles and incrustations that are typical for excavated bronzes. And when this kind of excavated bronzes are found in the field and brought to a temple and reconsecrated, they are usually very thoroughly cleaned to be fit for worship, but it did not happen with the Nataraja somehow. Further, the statue was presumably bought by Chevaux-de-Braille in and around 1925 or 26, but only offered for sale to the society in City-Lou's gallery in 1935, so almost 10 years later. We do not know exactly, at least for sure, when it was sent to City-Lou, maybe 1933, but it's not sure. And why it took so long? Finally, since there are not many dancing Shivas of this size, we assume, and it's very likely, that the statue mentioned in the correspondence is indeed the one bought in 1935 by the Society. However, there is no photograph or a detailed description of the Nataraja in the correspondence. To be absolutely sure that we talk about one and the same statue, one would have to access the Cité archive that is in the Paris Pagoda in the hope to find more information. So more research is pending, and let's see if we can do it. To sum up, the 5 sculptures discussed today are a good example of what Indian art objects could be found in Cité Paris Gallery, and also of where such objects came from to him, so mainly Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, and above all, Gabriel Jouveau-Debray, who really had influence on the choices being made. At the same time, these objects represent an overview in miniature of what was bought by the members of the society in the 1920s and 1930s, and in a broader sense, what was trending that time. Another fascinating topic that certainly deserves further study. Thank you.
Many thanks, Anna. Finally, a warm welcome to Eduardo Centours, whose presentation is titled An Archaeology of the Asian Art Market, the Lou Caro Archive at the Villa Guimet. Eduard is curator of photography at Musée Guimet and a specialist of 19th century photography in Asia. We're excited to hear your talk, Eduard.
Thank you, Paramita. And thank you very much to the Royal Asian Art Society in the Netherlands for inviting me for this talk. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you, Marianne, for organizing this event. Before I talk about this Lou Caro archive that is more at the core of our discussion today, I would like to present the Villa Guimet, where I work, and which was recently created at the Musée Guimet to federate the research in our museum. For those of you who wouldn't know about it, the Musée Guimet was founded in Lyon in 1879 by the French industrialist and collector Émile Guimet as a museum of Oriental religions. In 1889, it was moved to a new building in Paris and progressively became, in the following decades, a fine art museum, expanding beyond religious art to encompass all the arts of Asia. It is now home to about 60,000 artworks from Buddhist Asia, from Afghanistan to Japan and Mongolia to Indonesia, 100,000 books, 600,000 photographs, 1,000 linear meters of written archives, and about 4,000 audio and audiovisual archives. These remarkable collections make the Guimet one of the most important Asian art museums in the world, and in the West especially, and certainly one of the most important ones in Europe. The status gives us a responsibility to provide the best experience possible to our visitors and a high-quality content in order to do justice to the incredible wealth of Asian aesthetics, crafts, and cultures. The Guimet also federates high-quality research from our curatorial team, each to their own exhibitions, articles and books, but also in relation with international partners, and I'll get back to it later on more ambitious projects. In December 2024, in order to support, promote, and fund this research, the museum president, Yannick Lins, launched a new international research center at the Guimet called the Villa Guimet. Eventually housed in the Hotel Heidelbach, which is very close to the museum, one of the museum's 3 sites, in fact, the villa will merge and provide access to exceptional resources, the ones I just mentioned, including the library, the archives, scientific documentation on the artworks, and the photography collections. Taking a multidisciplinary approach and leveraging technology to serve heritage, the villa will emerge, we hope, as an important player on the international research stage on Asian arts. So what exactly does the Villa Guimet encompass? It first and foremost houses an international level library with a collection of works on Asian arts and continually enriched since the founding of the museum in 1879. It also brings together, preserves, and promotes unique archives on Asian arts, religions, and cultures, and the history of collections. There is also an important collection of 600,000 photographs on glass, film, and paper that I'm lucky to curate, dating from the 1850s to the present day, and comprising precious documents for the history of art and archaeology, as well as very important examples of the art of photography in Asia. The Villa Guimet will, of course, become a research center connecting these exceptional resources and will welcome researchers through grants and fellowships in order to promote these resources and help advance knowledge on Asian arts. The Villa Guimet has three essential missions. First one is to preserve, research, and promote exceptional art collections from Asia. Number two is develop international research on Asian arts by hosting researchers and implementing innovative tools. We currently have a program that I'm happy to lead that uses AI as a tool for research on early photography in Japan. And the third goal is to promote, share the results of this research through a program of lectures, seminars, and cultural activities. The Villa will provide access to these resources that I already mentioned. It is, of course, a great challenge to conserve and curate such vast resources. But we are an ambitious team, and we hope to welcome you very soon if you want to do research at the Villa. First and foremost, the Villa Guimet will be driven from the core of the museum by the curatorial team, made up of 13 specialists and researchers in all fields of Asian arts and archaeology, all of them involved in various international research projects and personal work on the museum collections. Of course, the curatorial team will also merge their research networks to enrich the program and the reach of the Villa Guimet globally. The establishment of the museum's multi-year strategy has enabled us to plan the study, preservation, indexing, and digitization and promotion of the collections. And so the four axes that we have worked on might seem very basic, but it was a way for us to sort of structure our different existing projects. So the materiality of artworks, of course, the context of creation, the history of Asian art, which are at the core of our research, but also the history of collections and the Asian art market. And I'll get back to it about the Lou Caro collection. And of course, a fourth axis, which is particularly dear to my heart, perceptions of Asia in Europe and of Europe in Asia. This is especially relevant to the history of photography as an interface of cultural exchange between the East and the West. Sorry. Organized around four flagship programs, the Villa Guimet's research policy is based on the involvement of scholars at international level and cooperation with leading institutions, such as the French School in the Far East, the Aga Khan Foundation for Culture, or Dunhuang Academy, with whom we have a project on the Pelliot archives, and Yoon already mentioned Paul Pelliot. The research programs led by the curatorial team will be supported through the hosting of researchers, the awarding of fellowships, and publication assistance. One of the Guimet's main missions, of course, is to share research findings with the widest audience possible through a great variety of events that are listed here. We don't have yet a program that is ready to share, but we have a conference cycle already in place on we call it the actualité de la recherche. It would be research news, if you will, and we invite young scholars to present their latest finds. The Guimet Villa is also an architectural project. It is set to take home in the Hôtel Heidelberg, which I already mentioned, a beautiful Hôtel Particulier in Paris, very close to the Guimet Museum, which will be transformed to house a reading and consultation rooms, a conference room, storage areas and workshop for conservation, processing and management of the collections, and communal spaces to enhance this beautiful working environment. We are lucky to have a beautiful tea pavilion in the garden of the Hôtel Heidelberg, which will stay there and welcomes the public every summer. You're very welcome to book a tea ceremony there when you come visit Paris. Now on to some key collections, and the Paul Pelliot collection, which Monsieur already talked about, a remarkable resource of about 1,500 photographs and exceptional handwritten scrolls from the caves of Dunhuang that were collected by Paul Pelliot in the early 20th century. The photographs that we have at the museum are glass plates. They're very fragile, but luckily they were all digitized and are online accessible for research. If you search Guimet Paul Pelliot, you'll find it easily. Another very important archive for us is the Haqqin archive, which documents the history of archaeology in Afghanistan. The Haqqin couple, Joseph and Ria, were very important scholars of Afghan archaeology at the time. Beautiful Buddhist work from the Gandhara period. And the Guimet has photographs, written archives, and films also shot in Afghanistan in the 1920s and 30s. We already have a partnership with the CNC, which is the National Cinematographic Center in Paris, who have helped us digitize these films so we can share them widely with the public. Now on to the Loup Garou archive, which is really the core of this presentation. I'll try to be quick and efficient now, but I only have 5 minutes left. So this archive will be the object of a long-term conservation and research project. As we have already talked about today, the City Loup founded different galleries in the West. He had, per se, activities in China, but these weren't really galleries, more like relays for him to acquire pieces that he could sell in Europe and in North America. So he founded a gallery in Paris in 1908, and he also created a gallery in London and another one in New York in 1915. This Loup Garou archive was produced by his New York gallery between, for sure, the 1930s to the 1960s, but it's possible that some of the photographs and archives in the archive date back to 1915. The Guimet was fortunate to have the great opportunity to acquire the New York Gallery's archive in 2018. In fact, it was gifted, thanks to the great support of Géraldine Lenain, by the Institute of Fine Art at New York University, who had gotten this archive from Francis Caro, who is Frank Caro's son. We already talked about Frank Caro, who infamously maybe cut this leg that we saw earlier. Frank Caro was City Loup's photographer at first at the New York Gallery, and he quickly became a close collaborator and then manager of the gallery, and eventually City Loup's successor in New York. So he kept enriching this archive. He died in 1980, and after his death, his son Francis Caro gave the archive to the Institute of Fine Arts, which very luckily for us, decided to donate the archive to the Guimet Museum in 2018. This archive contains thousands of photographs, inventory cards, miscellaneous manuscripts, and sales catalogs that document the artworks that transited through the gallery. But the archive also contains information about the previous and subsequent circulation of the pieces from Asia to private and public collections across the US and Europe. So we talked about provenance research already. This is a very important and crucial resource for provenance research for these reasons. The materiality and structure of the Loup Garou archive is in itself fascinating. They give us a glimpse into the workings of a commercial art gallery in the first half of the 20th century and bear witness to the ingenuity of its producers to keep track of their business. Let us dive a little deeper into that structure. First and foremost, we have inventory cards, about 20,000 of them. Each card is dedicated to one artwork, and it traces its circulation in the West, sometimes has a bit more information on its provenance in Asia, but mostly it is a description of the work, and it sort of tracks where it has been before it was sold. Once it was sold, the card was filed in another drawer, and maybe it could re-emerge if the piece reappeared and was rebought maybe by the gallery, and then sold on to another buyer. So on the left, you have examples of what sold cards look like. You can tell that the chronology is quite precise. And why is there a chronology? Actually, City Loup also loaned pieces sometimes. He sold, he donated, but he also loaned pieces to museums and to private collectors, maybe to incite them to buy something else, or to create bonds with them and advance his business. On the right-hand side, you have an example of an unsold piece. So maybe it was donated at some point to someone else. And on the bottom right corner is an index card that was created in the mid-1950s by Franck Caro, because Franck Caro did more than just conserve this archive. He also expanded it and found ways to make it even more efficient. And so these cards record, for instance, different artworks by the same artist. Sometimes they are cards that give information on a typology of object, and then you have a list of all the objects in the archive that represent this typology. And we also have the photographs. There aren't as many photographs as there are cards in the archive. There's about 12,000 photographs, so there's a gap of about 8,000 images that should be linked to inventory cards, but have disappeared. I have a theory about this. As you can see, we have glass plates. These are quite large format, 24 by 18 centimeters. But most of the photographs are negatives on film. And these negatives on film are all acetate, which is a material that was used as a base for negatives for about 100 years and still is today in film photography. But from 1890 to the 1960s, another material as a base for film photography was nitrocellulose. As some of you may know, nitrocellulose is a very unstable material. It deteriorates fast, and it is also flammable in some cases. This accounts for some of the most tragic events that happened in theaters, in cinema theaters in the early 20th century that caught fire because of nitrocellulose catching fire. In this archive, there is no nitrocellulose negative film, which is totally unheard of for an archive that was produced between 1915 to the 1950s, which is exactly the time frame when nitrocellulose was widely used as a base for photographs. So these, if they ever existed, these nitrocellulose negative might have disappeared at an earlier period. Maybe they were actually destroyed by either C.T. Liu, Franck Caro, Francis Caro, his son, or maybe even the IFA, we don't really know. We will investigate further this issue, but it's possible that the bad reputation of nitrocellulose accounts for the disappearance of a part of the archive. The archive also has miscellaneous documents, such as manuscripts, some folders that sometimes give us information on specific artworks. If there was a need to bring more detailed information on some pieces, C.T. Liu or Franck Caro created these folders. There is also a very important register on the, up top over there, which is sort of a complement to the inventory cards and the photographs. It gives us a picture of what the stock of the gallery looked like at a given time, probably created over a period of a few months. But it's very interesting, and that's why I called this presentation an archaeology of the Asian art market, because it's a layered history. It's like doing archaeology. You have sediments going on top of each other, and it's exactly like that with this archive. And so finally, I'd like to conclude by, sorry, I went ahead of myself there. Yes, by inscribing this archive into the Villa Guillemets project. Considering the importance of the Lou Caro archive for museums and researchers worldwide, the Villa Guillemets has made its treatment and study a priority over the next 5 years, building on a conservation audit that was made in 2022. We have hired an expert on the conservation and treatment of photography collections to help us understand the structure of this very complex archive. The study started in February and is almost complete. Hence my capacity to explain these things to you, because it's very difficult when you receive an archive in cardboard boxes and you don't really have a general inventory. You have to go through it. You have to have all the boxes at your disposition. And this archive was about 30 crates at the beginning. Now it has been transferred to temporary boxes, and eventually it would be rehoused in conservation material, entirely digitized. And the numbers will be indexed by a specialized company that we are going to hire for this, allowing us to have a correspondence of numbers, because there is the Citilou system of numbering, but there's also the Francao system of numbering. And with these two informations, we can easily find a piece that we're looking for. We can easily find a type of object that we're interested in. And thanks to this archive, we can provide for researchers a tool to do to research the history of objects and their circulations and their provenance, but also a history of collections, whether private or public. And finally, a history of taste, because that's exactly what Citilou was about. It's bringing to the West whatever his methods were, sometimes questionable, but nonetheless very interesting. And I don't think we should sort of brush this aside. We should look into these histories, but with curiosity and a passion for Asian art, and making these resources accessible is part of our mission as curators and museum professionals. We don't treasure these and hide these for our use, but our goal is to make them as widely accessible as possible. So the Guimet is going to hire a specialist of provenance research to look into the Guimet's pieces provenance first, and as we go along with the legal aspects as well, because this archive having been created in the US, we have business law to respect, we have civil law, we have different rules that we need to figure out precisely before we show anything. But in these legal bounds, we firmly intend to share this archive and contribute to the beautiful research that surrounds Citilou and the arts of Asia in general. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Edouard, for your presentation. And we now have about 25 minutes or so for a discussion and Q&A, which will start with a discussion on stage, followed by a Q&A with the audience. So can I invite all speakers to please come on stage and take a seat? Thank you. Please go ahead. Thanks again to all our speakers, to Geraldine, Yun, Anna, and Edouard, for your inspiring talks in which you've looked at a fascinating, intriguing personality, Citilou, and his life and work. Geraldine, you've taken us through the many lives, if you like, of Citilou, and old and new mysteries that are still uncovered. Yun has offered us a look into Lou's scholarly connections. Anna has brought very different objects from India, showing how difficult it can be to be sure of anything, from the origins of objects to circumstances under which they were bought and sold. And then Edouard has introduced us to the archives of Villa Guimet and the rich material that you've made available for us. Now, I would like to start today's discussion by addressing with all of you very briefly today's three sub-themes of life, legacy, and ethics of Citilou from each of your different perspectives. So, for instance, if we start with life, and with you, Geraldine, in your research into the Paris archive, starting as early as in the 2000s, and in your subsequent work with his family and other material, you've looked at a man who changes his name several times, who crafts and recrafts his life on several occasions, and who has the remarkable ability to adjust to changing circumstances, and somehow, in the end, finds a way to become both renowned and vilified. Can you, in all your research, after all that research that you've done, can you say something about how he sees himself? You've given him different names in your novel. For instance, you call him the Parisian dandy, or Citizen Lou, or the Kahnweiler of Asian art. He writes his own autobiography, but erases part of that autobiography. So how would you say he sees himself?
As a very complex person, he splits in two. So psychologically, you have to be very strong to be able to do that, because when he was in the West with Westerners, he would completely hide his Chinese side. And when he was in China, he would completely hide the Western side. So he actually had two lives. So I feel you have to be very strong, confident, but also to look for revenge in life. He wanted to succeed. As you said, all of you, he was a businessman. And money was very important to him. He made himself up by himself, and actually he made it to the top alone. And he was ashamed of where he came from. In the West, if you made it to the top by yourself, you can be proud, like nobody helped you and you really struggled on your own. And it's something I feel very positive to explain, to say. It's very inspiring. But for him, he was ashamed. So he would hide everything. And the reason he was giving, like people asking him, how did you come to Paris and why? And he would say, well, I come from a very high society family in China, and I got a scholarship to come and study in France. And what I forgot to say, in his life, he helped people, he helped students all his life. He was the first philanthropist, Chinese philanthropist I know. So he was helping students engineer because he believed in his country, and he thought that by helping those kids, Chinese kids, to study engineering, they would go back to the country and reconstruct the country and develop the country. And the second kind of students he was helping, because he didn't study and his wife didn't study, they didn't go to school. So engineers and medical students, because Marie-Rose was fond of medicine. She thought she was going to die every day. So she wanted to help medical students. That's the only thing they shared, is philanthropy. So at the entrance of the gallery, they had a box, and everybody, every request that was put in the box, he would help. So it was sometimes money, sometimes visas, because he had connections, sometimes scholarships, and he would help anybody that would ask. So he's a very complex and mysterious, it's not a black and white person, it's more complex than that.
Absolutely. Well, the question of philanthropy leads me to the legacy aspect, our second sub-theme of the day, actually. But I'd like to talk about a different aspect of legacy with our two curators, Anna and Edouard. And this is the question of the conceptual influence. How has C.T. Lu shaped our sense of Chinese and Asian art? And I speak from my own experience, my background in Chinese Buddhist art, and thinking back to when I was a student and an undergrad, many years ago. Some of the first images that I saw will have been C.T. Lu images. My question for you is, how do you, as curators, deal with that aspect of legacy? And by this I mean, think of the role of masterpieces. Both of you have talked about masterpieces in representing a culture or a tradition. Think of how masterpieces connect with lesser-known objects, or so-called lesser objects. Think of the degrees of significance that we accord to certain types of objects and how these degrees are questioned. How do you organize an exhibition, for instance, Anna, or go through the photo and inventory archives that you've shown us, Edouard? Do you question that legacy at all? And if so, how?
Well, it's a very complex question, Paramita.
I know.
Thank you for that. Yeah, looking in the archives is always a detective work, and I try then to keep my own ideas about, the person who sourced objects from somewhere actually on the background. You never know what you find. And on the one hand, it's different with City Lu for Chinese art and for Indian art, I think, to a degree, because he was an expert in Chinese art. He was not really an expert in South Asian art, even though he had a good nose. He could figure out very quickly, even without the previous knowledge, what will sell. But of course, his choices for objects were dictated, actually, for Indian objects, were dictated by choices of Gabriel Jouveau-Dobrun, who was a specialist, mainly of South Indian art and a lover of it. So we see, I think, 95% of influence of Jouveau-Dobrun in City Lu's choices. And that certainly is a big legacy. And again, it depends on the object, because if we think about the dancing Shiva form, the Nataraja, the South Indian Tamil dancing Shiva form, it started already be popularized by other people, you know, like Kumaraswamy, whose essay about the Nataraja appeared in 1912 already, the very first version, and then it started to roll. And so City Lu didn't invent it, but he, of course, could feel it, could feel that, that it's going to sell. And then especially in the United States, where there was more money in this, as you mentioned, the museums were created. Yeah. But I think by making an exhibition, that was your other part of the question, I think, well, it really depends. We don't need always to include masterpieces, right? There are significant objects that aren't masterpieces, and that's what I find fascinating about the work as a curator, which are not masterpieces, but they have a wonderful story to tell that can teach us a lot about people in the past, about choices being made. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Edouard, would you like to add to that?
Well, indeed, a difficult question, especially for me, because I am no historian of Asian art. I'm actually specializing in the history of photography in Asia, but I have so much to learn about the objects themselves. Everything I know about City Lu, actually, I learned from Géraldine's book and the archives that I could read. So I'm not speaking as an expert, more as a curator and an archivist, maybe. In terms of archives, and when you study photography, you learn to think in volumes and not necessarily in single pieces, because the history of photography is a history of mass production, whether it is artful, in your opinion, or whether it is a documentary image that has no aesthetic qualities. And when you start to sort of break that wall of separating rye from wheat, I don't know if it's a good translation, you start to look at these archives as a resource. And my goal is not necessarily to enhance a legacy or to break a legacy. It's really, to me, this Lou Caro archive is a treasure trove. It's something that, in its volume, in the number of objects that transited through the gallery, whether masterpieces or lesser known or lesser objects, will become, I hope, a tool for researchers to dig into the history of these objects. It doesn't matter to me really what it can tell about the legacy of City Lu. I think it's more important nowadays, especially, to look into the trajectories that these objects made, because we very often focus, of course, on the aesthetic merits of an artwork, its purity in a way, and the talent of the artist, and of course that's so important. But objects have also ritual histories, for instance. We can go into a more anthropological approach and talk about the rituals. You were talking about this temple. This is part of this ritual and anthropological history. This object had a life before it came to the museum. And also, these objects travel. They are travelers. They go across the world. They cross the Atlantic. They go back to Paris, especially in the history of City Lu. And to me, it goes beyond the provenance and the idea of looking at an object's pedigree or an object's right to be in a museum, or a museum's right to have that object. It is a story of circulation and of a global history. And that's another thing that I learned from the history of photography, is that globalization is not a new concept. It's very old, actually. You can go back to the 19th century and even the 18th century, the 17th century, the Middle Ages. Globalization has accelerated, of course, but it is an old story. And the way these objects have circulated globally is part of that history of globalization, I think.
This takes me to the third theme, in fact, circulation of object trajectories, and another aspect of legacy is the ethical question. And we all know that that is a complex question, deeply connected, in this context perhaps, with power relations, but also a question that can take us in many different directions. And just to give everyone a sense, or a reminder of in how many directions that can go, this is a question that I'd like to pose to all four of you, based on something you mentioned in your presentations or generally in your work. And I'd like for you to reflect on it and briefly comment on it. This is an enormous topic, I know, but briefly comment on it, just to give us a sense of the complexity of the matter. So for instance, if I start with Yoon, you talk about the role of philology in making sense of Asian art, and how a certain preference for inscriptions, for instance, or types of classification in early Western art history, considering the period that you consider, differs from Chinese intellectual and educational traditions. In your case, for instance, the ethical question could be one that has to do with the ethics of classification. What does it mean to classify the objects of one tradition using another classification tradition? In the case of the curators, both Anna and Edouard, of course, one of the big ethical questions for you, I'm sure, is what buying and selling means in the 1920s and 30s versus today. You are talking about the practicalities of procuring objects, hunting objects, as Geraldine sometimes calls loose activities. And these practicalities create histories. For instance, a history of absence, when you want to reunite two images that have now been separate, or a leg that's now somewhere else. But also absences on lists. We have lists of where some of the Natarajas, well, a collection of Natarajas that were procured, but we're not sure where they are now, and vice versa. Now, an interesting moment in Anna's presentation is the connection between Lou and Jouveau-Dubreuil, particularly when Jouveau-Dubreuil complains that Lou will not let him publish until such and such things happen. So can you, in your reflection, maybe understand that complaint and using it, commenting on this, to comment on this ethical question of buying and selling then and now? And for Edouard, the accessibility too is a part of an ethical issue. As you make your material accessible in Villa Guillemets, part of the archives now become open for people to go into, but there is a Parisian other part of the archive in the pagoda that is somewhat less accessible. What does accessibility mean in terms of ethics? And finally, for Geraldine, to maybe briefly reflect on as well, there's a very interesting comment in the Chinese introduction to your book by Robert Cao, where Robert Cao, an art collector, says, Lou did a service to the community by adding monetary value to Chinese art objects, because that monetary value makes the object recognizable outside of China. Can you comment very briefly on what financial value does to art, and whether you can respond in some way to that remark? And for all of you, just to keep it within a certain context, the main point is the context of response, so that how does the significance of the object change when it enters these different discussions, and what does that do for the communities involved? Very briefly. It's a huge question, I know. Okay. But let's focus on the significance of the object in the different connections.
Okay.
Maybe that's a good starting point.
Okay, thank you very much. I remember you said it's classification of art. It's a very important question. Like I just introduced my first class in my art history. My professor told me that Winkelmann was the founding father of the European art history. And Winkelmann, he made a classification of European art. It's 3 phases. It's old tide, it's ancient art, and new tide is modern art, and contemporary art is the after that. So when we learned art, our professor told us, you choose a period to study. But for me, okay, you know, for me, I look like a Chinese, but actually, yes, I am Chinese, but my academic background is totally built up in the Dutch university. So to me, the classification of art is that 3, old, new, and contemporary. After my BA, I went to my master, I went to my PhD. I tried to figure out, I put my Chinese background to my Dutch education background, put them together. I found out that doesn't fit. It doesn't fit. I cannot find any piece of Chinese art. It belongs to the old tide, or new tide, or contemporary. So now we have the problem, the classification. But when I do research about C.T. Lu, I found out C.T. Lu, he did not really force all of the Asian art to any kind of old tide and new tide. Actually, he published one small book about the history of Chinese art. He put the Chinese art in the different Chinese dynasty. He did not really force this Chinese art in this Western classification. He tried to educate it. This European, American buyers and audience. What this means, this art, this Asian art in Chinese history, in Asian history. And also, he collaborated with Paul Pelliot and other scholars. And these scholars, they did not try to force this art, Chinese art, Asian art, sorry, it's not brief, in the classification, sure. But also they try to look into the Chinese classical text, try to find out the collection. It's why I think this philological method is so important. Also, we talk about 2 kinds of art, but actually the methodology is the same. They share this base ground, and then they try to introduce how to merge these 2 methods.
All right. Thank you, Yoon. Let's take some questions from the audience as our other curators reflect on their questions. Some of your questions might connect to what was said before. Then we can have some interactions with you as well. I'm sure you've been holding on to quite a few questions throughout the session.
Thank you for your lectures. I'm Renee Steenberg. I'm a former board member of the Asian Art Society, and I published about the history of the society. Of course, I encountered Lu in many ways in that respect. I have two questions. I don't want to elaborate too much because we have little time, but the first is about the pictures of Lu's interiors, which I'm sorry you had to flip through so quickly, and maybe you can share them with us, because I was wondering how his way of, well, actually theatrically exposing the objects influenced museums and collectors in their way of actually exposing the object in their own rooms. And the other one is about the market that in one way opened and then maybe closed, because we had, of course, you mentioned the Great Depression, recession in the 1930s, Second World War, and then the communists taking over. So what happened to the supply chain of Lu, and how did he survive? So maybe that's an easier question than the first one. Thank you.
We still have 2 hours.
Please go ahead with answering. We'll talk later.
So I will try to quickly answer your first question. I'm sorry, I had to flip through the... yeah, putting a decor... We always come back to the same thing. C.T. Lu, don't forget, is a businessman. So he wanted to sell as much as he could the pieces. And in order to sell more expensively the pieces, he had to convince, to educate first, to introduce, educate, explain, and convince. And the best way to do that was to actually, because people would not travel systematically to China, and he knew that. Of course, before him, you had Freer, Guimet, Cernucci. They went to Asia and brought back many pieces, but they were not dealers. They had missions, and they didn't do it systematically. C.T. Lu was the first one to understand globalization. So at that time, the objects were in China, and the money was in the West. Today is the opposite. So the pieces are here and the money is over there. In a century, it just flipped through. So to come back, this decor imagination was to convince the buyer to put more money on the piece. So he wanted the buyer to have a 360. So this is first part of the question. That the second part was, the second question was? Ah oui.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there's an enormous recession, and there's of course a war, so that would have influenced transport from the east, probably.
Most of the pieces in China left before Cultural Revolution. They were all from 19th century, early 20th century. Most of the pieces actually were brought in the West. And everything that was left, the collection of the Gugong, left when the communists arrived and they went to Taiwan. So actually, and this is the latest struggle of C.T. Lu, is to defend himself, because, as you may know, he was at the time, but even today, seen as the biggest criminal ever. Because he has taken the pieces out of China for 50 years. But he has always, you can flip through his catalogs. He died in 57, and the 10 last years of his life, he spent most of his time, he spent it to defend himself as an ambassador of the Chinese culture. And he would say that he was putting those pieces, he was acting as an ambassador for China and putting the pieces into institutions outside of China, so people could be aware about the Chinese culture, and he would educate people by publishing catalogs. And so for him, art had no borders, and he was seeing himself as a diplomat and ambassador to make Chinese culture well known outside of China. So, as I say, there is no black and white. It's more difficult than that. Many gray areas with C.T. Lu.
Thank you, but shortly, does it mean that the most active part of his art dealing was before the Second World War, and after that his role changed?
Well, he died in 57, so everything he, as I said, sourced in China until 48. And then in 48, everything stopped for him, the sourcing stopped. He would never be able to go back to China. So then his business continued, but only with the stock he had already outside of China. So for example, in 48, when everything stopped for him, he had the biggest shipping group to go to New York. There was 2,000 pieces and many top pieces, national treasures. And everything was blocked. It couldn't go to New York. And this is what made the collection of the Shanghai Museum today. So it's to give you an idea. What you see today, especially when you visited the Shanghai Museum and the main floor, the bronze room, most of the pieces come from City-Loo. So those 2,000 pieces were actually stayed in Shanghai, and it's today in the collection.
Thank you.
There are a couple of more questions in the audience.
Hello, thank you very much for these very fascinating lectures. I was actually very happy with the questions Paramita Paul asked about ethics, because we have heard a lot about life and legacy, and into ethics we didn't delve that much, I think. I think those are very big questions, and maybe we need another afternoon for that. But I was just wondering, the curators from the museums here at Rijksmuseum and Musée Guimet, whether you could say something about, of course, there were the ethics of that time, in which these objects were being maybe looted, or they were bought maybe, and then they came into Europe and United States. But I was wondering, when you look into the ethics now, what do you see as the responsibility of the Rijksmuseum and Musée Guimet, and also in working with private organizations like the Society of Asian Art?
Should I start? Please. Thank you for your question. It's a very important one. I think it's very central to this question. It's sort of the elephant in the room. And I would say for the Guimet that our responsibilities nowadays are twofold in connection with our topic today. The first one is to research the provenance of our collections. That's very important, and it's going to be one of the focuses of research at the Villa Guimet in the history of collections and the Asian art market. And as I was telling you, we are currently working on drafting a call for applications for a postdoctoral researcher to come to the Guimet and have access to our archives and research the provenance of some of our artworks. I say some because we know the provenance of many of our pieces, and in many cases they are not problematic. There are other objects whose history is a bit more complex and unknown. So there is work in that realm. The second responsibility in relation to that archive, to me, is to share it widely, to make it widely accessible to researchers. Because as you could understand, this is a vast archive. 20,000 inventory cards, 12,000 photographs. It's difficult to wrap your head around such an archive. And so it's not necessarily our job to do the research into that, because it would take up a lot of resources, financially and in terms of manpower. But it is our job to make sure that the archive is accessible to the researchers who would want to come and do that research. And so that's exactly what we're going to do with this archive. Of course, it is at the core of our mission as a national museum in France. It is part of our public service duties to make archives freely accessible. It's very important in France. Of course, we have to navigate all the legal rules that surround the archive. I mentioned earlier that we have to abide to different law systems because of the nature of this archive. This is an investigation that we are going to launch very soon with legal experts to look into what we're allowed to share and what we must, for legal reasons, keep to ourselves in the archive. And this includes, for instance, copyright. This may not be an issue here because copyright protects artists, of course, and authors. The photographers who reproduced the pieces were hired by the gallery and were operators paid by the gallery. So the gallery probably had copyright for all these images. The second one is public domain. This protects the gallery owners, but also the collectors who have bought the pieces. In some cases, we may not be able to share some information because we are bound by the public domain laws. And so once we figure all this out, it's quite a task, once we figure all this out, we'll make sure to share all the rest to researchers. Maybe there's a middle ground to be found as well. We may not be able to put everything online for people to research remotely. We may be obliged by the different systems that I just mentioned to grant an access on site only. This is just, I'm just giving you all the elements that we have at our disposition now, but these are the rules of the game, if I may say. But the goal of the game, the winner is the one who shares everything. I think it's really important nowadays to stop hiding this information, because when you have a secret, when you censor an information, it doesn't make it disappear. It will just make the problem more difficult in the future. So let's start doing this. Yeah.
How about restitution?
Restitution?
So I want to add something I didn't say, but I mentioned it really quickly. But Citilou bought everything he has brought to the West. Okay, so they were purchased. Yeah. So everything was bought. Nothing was looted. So that's why I keep saying it's not black and white. It's gray areas. This is a period in China where they left the pieces to go out. I cannot hear you.
Sorry,
I was asking, what about India and how equal were the parties?
How equal?
How equal
Everything
was the
bought.
buying and selling?
Everything was bought also in India. So this is, I fully understand your question, because this is a discussion that is happening today. But what I want to say is every piece that left India or China has an invoice, was bought. So
I would like to add about that on the one hand, of course, as curators, our first task is provenance research, and that's what we are doing. And of course, we share it. As far as society is concerned, the archive is available, and it's always been for scholars and for people who would like simply to have a look at it. But what is also very important, I think, in case of well, I think every country of origin is the contact with colleagues in countries of origin and discussing and coming perhaps to a common agreement, as far as it's possible at all in the world today, about the future of the objects. For our objects, as I say, on the one hand, we of course do research on the objects where we can do research on. But in some cases, as you may know, objects were bought in the art market, not from Citilou. That's actually an easier part, maybe, but on the art market in 1950s, 1960s, and we simply have no way to know where they came from, when did they leave India or Sri Lanka or China or any other country in the world. These informations were not required in those days, and then at some cases we simply don't go further, you know, we arrive to a wall and we can't step further. So yeah, there are very different stories of different objects. I think every object has a different story to it.
Can I make a little comment on the discussion just before this? Because Ms. Lenin, thank you very much for the presentations, all of you. But you said that all the objects that Citilou acquired from India were purchased, and I think you cannot really say that, I think. If you look at the Jouvau de Breu archives in the Musée Guimet, it's clear that Jouvau de Breu in the Amravati region, the Krishna River, that he went there, and he writes in his letter that he looted the sites before the British were there, and he smuggled them from British soil to Pondicherry, French soil, put them on the ship, the Messagerie Maritime. And also with the bronzes, he gives long lists of his pieces in the letters to the museum, to Monsieur Hakim. And there you can see the method that he's using is not particularly a proper one. He gives local people a lot of money send them out to the fields, bribe the head of police, the chief priest, and the mayor of town, and then simply say, I want to buy this piece, and then they ask the people if they want. The ones that didn't want to sell the piece, they were kept in their houses when the piece was removed and then smuggled back to Pondicherry. So I think it's not particularly that you can say that everything was officially acquired, and it was clear at the time, because he wrote it in his letters.
Yes, Can I interrupt for a second? Maybe our head of Asian art would like to respond to that very briefly, since the question is a bigger question than all of us have.
It's a nice neutral moment to
enter
the stage. Thank you, great. I do of course understand your concerns, Alexander, and I think we can all agree that the way things were done then are not the way we would do things today. And the question is, what is the task of a museum today, isn't it? In this whole debate. And as Anna has indicated, yes, you need to do that, first of all, the research very carefully. This takes a lot of time. This is a very important task of the museum. We try to find out as much as possible about the object. And secondly, as Edouard has mentioned, we share that information as freely as possible, openly, without hiding anything. And Anna has already introduced the third part, which I think is also very important, is dialogue. We are in contact with countries in Asia to have an open dialogue. To give you examples, our curator, William, for Indonesia, has found out a lot about a certain group of sculptures. He then publishes those results in the academic magazine of the Rijksmuseum, the Rijksmuseum Bulletin, so it's spread across the world as openly as possible. And then he goes to Jakarta and gives a lecture about the results in the National Museum, talking to his colleagues. So everybody there is aware of what is being found here. And I think Anna has done the same thing in India, and sharing her results and keeping the dialogue open, because when it comes to difficult questions about provenance, you have a better quality discussion if you know each other already. So the aspect of dialogue is crucial, I think. Does that answer the question?
I think it does, right? I think it does.
But maybe you have some further questions. I don't want to.
Yeah, we have to sort of move towards the end. So can we take one final question? Is there time for that? We are overdone. We can take the final question outside.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer questions individually afterwards.
Menovitsky is happy to answer questions afterwards. So thank you again to all our speakers for today's presentation, to the audience for your patience and your questions. Let's continue the conversation outside. There is a curated tea experience for all of us to get refreshed and start talking anew, and let's keep the dialogue going. Thank you very much. Thank you.